Welcome to Storytime for Grownups from the Ashland branch of the Pamunkey Regional Library. My name is Michael, and today our story, in honor of Veterans Day, is Yankee Two by Will Mackin. The story is from a great collection called Bring Out the Dog, and is published by Random House. Okay, and the story is entitled Yankee Two, and it's in Hit, Iraq. Hit glowed blue under the new moon. We walked toward it from the south, across the rocky desert, over railroad tracks and a four-lane highway, then down a dirt road that ran perpendicular to the silver Euphrates, and took our third left onto a paved street. Our target building had sliding windows and a muddy garden out front. JJ darkened the flickering streetlight across from it with one suppressed round. Thip, dink, and pieces of glass tumbled to the earth. We took positions for the raid. Security in the back alley, blocking stations on the intersections, to the east and to the west, assaulters on both sides of the front door, and waited for Spot. If Spot had thought everything was cool, he would have given JJ a thumbs up. Instead, Spot hurried over to the assaulters on the door. He grabbed Mike by the sleeve and swapped him with Tall. He grabbed Tall and swapped him with Jaja. He sent Bobby to the back alley to link up with Lou. Spot had never done so much shuffling around. But this was the night after Clam, and we're all still a little uneasy. Spot stepped back from the door, if not satisfied with the changes he'd made, then at least willing to give this new configuration a try. He looked at me, standing off to the corner of the building where I always stood. I wanted to make eye contact with Spot so he could see that I was okay. I knew how to look okay. I knew how to make it seem like I wasn't bothered by what had happened at Quam, or for that matter, Habanyaya, or Ramadi. The funny thing was, nothing happened at any of those places. Nothing bad, at least. At Quam, we'd been ambushed, caught with our pants down, but we'd managed to fight our way out. And we'd killed a lot of insurgents along the way. Insurgents who were ex-Republican Guard, or Saddam's version of us. Yet no one in our troop was even hurt, unless you count Lou, who either didn't feel pain or did an excellent job of fooling himself. No one could argue, however, that bad nights didn't happen, and that we weren't due for one. Standing outside the building in Hit, I tried not to think about it. I tried to act like everything was fine, and I wanted to see myself reflected in Spot's gaze. The problem was, Spot had a lazy eye, and I always mixed up which one. After figuring it out, I tell myself left is right or right is wrong to improve my chances of remembering the next time. Inevitably, though, I'd look directly into Spot's bad eye. That night, this misalignment skewed toward the Pleiades, or that part of the sky where Zeus had transformed the 7 daughters of Atlas into doves, then those doves into stars. Before I could correct myself, Spot turned toward the street and gave JJ a thumbs up. JJ, standing under the darkened streetlight, was an ex-smoker who would have lapsed during times like this but for a cigarette's telltale glow. Still, he eased his nerves pretending. His pantomime, I knew that he'd held his cigarette between his ring and middle fingers, flicking the ash with a card trick action of the thumb. His whole hand covered his mouth as he brought the filter to his lips and inhaled. That night, in late March, his exhalation was warm enough, or the air cold enough, to create what appeared to be smoke. JJ gave the signal. Mike kicked open the door, and the assaulters funneled in. I remained outside watching the alley between the Target building and its eastern neighbor, while Spot kept an eye on the western alley. Or was it gasoline? A trickle of sewage, ran out of my alley and onto the street. Or was that gasoline? Our Target building in Quime had been booby-trapped with gas cans, duct taped with nails. Former members of Saddam's Republican Guard had waited for the assaulters to get far enough inside before triggering the explosions via remote control. But this smelled more like shit. Or did it? As the assaulters ran through the building, I debated whether or not to break into radio silence to warn them. Something about that might turn out to be nothing. Zsa beat me to it. "The refrigerator is padlocked," he broadcast over Troop Common from the kitchen. Tull chimed in from the bedroom on the second deck. "The walls and ceiling are mirrored." Then Bobby from the back alley. "I got a car up on blocks." These observations tended to snowball. "Shut your fucking traps," Spot told everyone on that frequency. The remainder of the assault passed in silence, and the search for intelligence began. Spot sent me in. I ran through the front door and into the living room, where I flipped cushions off the couch. As a tech, I was looking for phones, SIM cards, flash drives, and those things disguised as or hidden within something else. I worked by the red light of my headlamp. The TV remote was just that. The clock radio on the kitchen counter flashed midnight or noon. The refrigerator was indeed padlocked. I opened it with the bolt cutters and dipped my hand into every cold pail of ice cream. Moving on, I lifted the lid on every dented teapot. I dug my knife into the flour jar, the sugar bowl. I climbed the stairs to the second floor. There I found Tull, staring at a big wheel parked in the hallway. I continued up the stairs to the third floor, and Mike stood in the doorway. "Come here," he whispered. I followed Mike into a room with an open window. A boy sat on his bed. "I need to go up on the roof," Mike said. "Can you keep an eye on him?" "Sure," I said. The boy's bare chest was congenitally sunken. His teeth chattered. Blue night creeping in the window mixed with the red glow of my headlamp to render him purple. I knew the Arabic word for stand. The boy stood. His pajama bottoms were printed with soccer balls. I patted him down and squished the pockets. The boy was clean. I told him in English to sit back down on the bed, which he did. I showed him how to lace his fingers together and rest his hands on top of his head. We looked at each other, both of us with our fingers laced, hands on top of our heads. I told him to stay just like that. I found a computer hidden under a blanket beneath the boy's desk. I removed the blanket and set the computer on top of the desk. It was a work in progress. A kludge of salvaged components, and quite possibly an innocent hobby, though I wouldn't know for sure until I'd taken the hard drive back to the lab for analysis. The boy had mounted a SATA drive on the 14-inch aluminum rack, along with a 480-watt power supply. He'd used 8 billion of these itty-bitty fucking screws. I removed my micro tool set from my side pocket, opening its plastic case, released the smell of the lab, a mix of acetone and ozone that never failed to calm me. I began unscrewing the world's tiniest screws with the world's tiniest screwdriver. Meanwhile, the rest of the troop was wrapping things up. They slipped past the boy's room. They crept down the stairs. They lined up in the street, ready to leave. Approximately 4 billion screws remained. I decided to break the drive off the rack. I bent it up hard as I could. I pushed it down, same. I bent it up again, this time harder, bang. I thought the door to the boys' room had slammed shut. But I turned to find Mike in the doorway, smoke rising from his chamber. The boy was sitting on the bed, looked unhurt. His eyes were wide open, his arms straight up. There was a chip in the cinder block wall behind him, high and right. Mike didn't take a second shot, as we were trained to do, as was, by then, but all but reflexive. He just penetrated the room with his eyes down the sights and reached into one of the boy's pajama pockets. "He's clean," I said, but Mike pulled something out. He flipped it over in his hand. It was a black box, the size of a deck of cards. Mike looked for switches, wires, antennas, anything to indicate that it might transmit a signal, activate a fuse, detonate explosives, and bring the whole building down on our heads. Spot appeared, bottom lip packed with chew, lazy eye twitching. Taking the box from Mike, he performed his own inspection. He was digging in his pocket for it, Mike said. Spot held the box at arm's length. "You think it's a trigger?" he asked me. Triggers were walkie-talkies, cordless phones, and garage door openers. "No," I said. The three of us turned our headlamps on the boy. His arms, which had lowered maybe half an inch, shot back up, revealing curls of pit hair. Shadow filled the depression in his chest. "What is this?" Spot asked in his rinky-dinky Arabic. The boy shrugged. "Get him some shoes," Spot said. I knotted the elastic so the hood would stay on the boy's face. I looped the zip ties around so he couldn't work his hands free. He was 12, maybe 13, right at the lower end of what we considered fighting age. In his closet were a pair of sneakers with light-up soles and loafers decorated with brass buckles. I led him out of the room in the loafers and onto the stairs, down which he moved like he'd never descended a flight of stairs before. I steered him out the front door and across the muddy garden and trampled dandelions. Holding the boy by the arm, I took my place among the troop lined up along the curb. JJ signaled, "Move," and Jaja stepped off on point. Bobby stepped off 10 yards behind Jaja. Lou waited for Bobby to walk his 10 yards. Meanwhile, Bobby stared at the storm drain on the other side of the street. A dull glow, visible on night vision, emanated from the grate. It could have been just the heat rising off the sewage below, but then again, it could have been something else. Something that might climb up into the street and end our unusual streak of good luck. The glow surged. Bobby raised his rifle. I tightened my grip on the boy's upper arm. I felt his pulse quicken. Closing on the storm drain, Bobby hit it with sparkle. We each had a device mounted to our rifles that generated sparkle, i.e., an infrared spotlight with a laser at its center. We used to illuminate targets and to see them in dark places we otherwise couldn't. Bobby's infrared spotlight, for example, brightened the depths of the storm drain. His laser skipped across its heavy iron plate. Below the plate, shadows opened and closed like doors. Waves appeared in the infrared beam, diverging from the laser like ripples from a stone dropped in a lake, which was the opposite of what I've observed the night before in Quime. Our target building in Quime was like a cubist interpretation of a target building. Its cinder blocks were stacked precariously. Its windows appeared to be an assembly of fractured windows. After the gas cans blew, further destabilizing the walls and shattering the windows for good, small arms fire rained down from adjacent buildings. I was standing off the corner of the target building, waiting for Spot to send me in. When the ambush triggered, I took cover in the alley overgrown with ragweed. By the sound of the onslaught, AKs chattering, RPGs whistling, we were surrounded. and outnumbered. Any second, I figured, the enemy would press his attack. Rounds hit short, spraying dirt. Gunmen shouted to one another, roof to roof. Something moved in the alley across the street. I sparkled, and there was Spot with my laser on his chest. Infrared waves converged as if Spot were drawing energy from the cinder block wall he leaned against. The ragwood that partially concealed him, and the cool night air above him. Seeing me, Spot signaled come. Spot covered me as I ran across the street. Glass crunched underfoot. Bullets ricocheted off the pavement. I ducked into the alley and leaned against the wall opposite Spot. I remained standing and fired one way while Spot knelt and fired the other. I felt his rounds zip past my abdomen. Smoke poured from the broken windows of the target building. The enemy's rooftop shouts grew anxious. Spot and I fell into an on and off rhythm like men working on the railroad. Our rifles clanged like two sledgehammers, striking the same metal spike. I either killed the dude on the roof or he ducked down in the nick of time. A door opened up on the street from the target building and JJ appeared. I covered Spot as he ran to JJ. Spot and JJ covered me. I followed them through the door and into the living room. The three of us vaulted a couch. We crashed into the kitchen that smelled like meat about to burn. A woman upstairs screamed. Spot reached to open the back door, and an RPG detonated in the living room behind us. Firelight illuminated the kitchen. I could see in JJ's and Spot's faces that we might not make it. Both of Spot's eyes were fixed on the same point. He counted 1, 2, 3, then flung open the back door. We ran into an alley, firing at windows, doorways, and shadows on all sides. Now, Hit was shaping up to be something of a milk run, or so I thought, until I saw the infrared waves in Bobby's sparkle reversed. Did waves diverging from the laser mean that we were fucked? Or was it waves converging a la Quam? Had we in fact been fucked at Quam? It could have been so much worse. Lou had taken a nail in the thigh, which he'd yanked out with a pair of pliers on the helicopter ride back to the outpost. He held up the nail, bent and bloody, for all of us to see, before chucking it out the helo's open ramp and into the night. Bobby stopped sparkling the storm drain, continued walking up the street. Lou, not even limping, stepped off behind Bobby. It was uphill, maybe a quarter mile, to the intersection where we turned south toward the highway. The railroad tracks and the desert beyond. JJ, still standing under the shot-out streetlight, took another drag of his imaginary cigarette. Then all at once, Lou sparkled a pile of trash. Zsa sparkled a bedsheet hanging from a rooftop clothesline, and Tull sparkled a ground floor window, making it surge like a portal to another dimension. "This ain't Dark Side of the fucking Moon laser light show," Spot radioed, and all the sparkles went dark. Sunrise, back at our outpost, decelerating rotor blades cast zoetrope shadows on the LZ. The pilots unstrapped the gunners' folded belts of 7.62 into the ammo cans, and the troop walked toward the huts. I unasked the trail helicopter, then assisted the boy in the same way I'd assisted him from the curb outside his home. Through the streets of Hit, across the highway and railroad tracks, and into the desert, where the helos had picked us up. Now I guided the boy, still hooded and zip-tied, to crouch under the zip rotor blades. We met JJ, Spot, and Mike beside the twisted and rusty batch of bombed-out ammo dump. You seen him fucking around in his pockets? JJ asked me. Spot held the box, which was somehow blacker in daylight. No, I said. I was taking the computer apart. Little something called situational awareness, he said. Heard of it? Spot's bad eye stared directly into the sun. He handed me the black box to take to the lab. And what the fuck happened to you, JJ asked Mike. I missed, Mike said. Then what? Spot asked. His hands were up. The wind blew. The ammo dump's rusty door creaked on its hinges, and I saw inside. Sunlight slanted through the multiple bomb holes in the roof. Spot said to JJ, I guess we shoot once, then wait to see if the targets had a change of heart. I guess so, JJ said. From the ammo dump, I escorted the boy north along the outpost's only road. Plywood huts lined either side. We passed Spot and JJ's hut, Lou and Mike's. We yielded to Jaja in his silk robe on the way to the shower. We sidestepped the tractor tire that told like to flip end over end while working on his core. I didn't pull on the boy's arm, and he didn't try to break free. He just put one foot in front of the other as he had for the entire journey from hit. Moving not too fast and not too slow. And never once had he veered off course, even during the long stretch across the desert when I'd let go of his arm. Where any other detainee would have booked it, and I would have had to chase him down, the boy had simply walked right alongside of me, hooded and handcuffed, the brass buckles on his loafers flashing in the starlight. The boy was, without a doubt, the most cooperative detainee I had ever had to walk out of anywhere. After we'd reached the pickup zone, a hard patch of dirt 3 miles west of Hit, I'd sat him down on the most comfortable rock I could find. I'd given him fresh water and pound cake from my escape and evade stash. I'd even thought about calling the Terp over to help me explain to the boy what was about to happen right before it happened. The helicopters had dropped out of the sky with a hellacious screech. We were sandblasted mercilessly. The boy panicked and tried to run, and I thought I couldn't blame him. I couldn't let this happen either. So I dragged him under the spinning rotors, kicking and wreathing as sand got in my eyes and tears rolled up on my face. I tossed him into the bird like a bale of hay. Then I jumped on top of the boy so he wouldn't slide out the open door of the helo as it made a climbing turn toward the outpost. Once we were level and headed southwest, I propped the boy up against the cockpit firewall, facing aft. I'd sat his feet with my legs hanging out the door. I watched the sunrise and daybreak brighten the face of the boy's hood. Power lines flashed below the helicopter's skids. Goats had run in counterclockwise circles in their pens. Above, a flock of cranes, scared by the helicopter's noise, had tucked their wings and dive-bombed us, missing the rotor by inches. At the north end of the outpost solitary road was the facility, where we kept the detainees, though not for long, just a day or two, usually, or whatever time it took to run a few interrogations. Those who considered guilty were transferred to a higher level institution outside Baghdad. Those who we deemed innocent, we drive east to within walking distance of the highway. Then we release them with as much water as they wanted to carry, and $20 so they might negotiate a ride home. Those men must have told their stories, which must have been repeated by others, which meant that the boy might have heard them, which meant that he might have known about the helicopter ride and the walk down this straight, dusty road. He might have also heard that at the end of the road, we'd climb 3 stairs and enter a stuffy room that smelled like bleach. Now we stood in the facility's lobby. The door banged shut behind us as the boy jumped. "Check in," I yelled through the wool blanket that separated the lobby from the cells. 5 detainees, most of whom I'd walked out of one place or another, all of whom had been with us since before crime. Knew what check-in meant. They stared, hissing their ventriloquist hiss, a neither here nor there sound that served as both a means of communication and a form of resistance. Here the hiss was meant to welcome the boy, while also letting him know he wasn't alone. Its message was unmistakable. Soon enough the boy would be practicing in his cell, projecting his hiss action across the room at first, then through the wall, then around the corner, and into the future. So that 3 years from now, after the war was over and I was home for good, I'd lie awake next to my sleeping wife with our children dreaming in their own beds, and I'd hear it. "Hello?" I yelled over the hissing. The interrogators, O, positive, and RH, negative, emerged through the wool blanket. They took on the boy's pajamas, loafers, and overall scrawniness. "A little young, don't you think?" RH said. "Yankee Two tykes like 'em young," OP said, referring to me and my radio call sign. "He was acting funny," I said, "but I don't think he's bad." "They're all bad," OP said. I heard a hiss right behind me, but I knew better than to turn around. "What did you find on him?" RH asked. I produced the black box. OP took it out of my hand to see that it had no telephone jack, no speaker mic, no charge port. He then discovered as well that the black box weighed more than he expected it to. And he might have noticed furthermore the harmony of its rectangular dimensions, which I later learned obeyed the golden section. That is to say, side A was to side B as B was to the sum of A and B. Opie returned to the black box and handed it to me. "If that thing ain't bad, then I'm Mother Teresa." The ice maker had been a Christmas gift addressed to any soldier. Positioned on the floor next to my cot, it played a lullaby. The tap rolled open. Water poured into the tank, into the freezing tray, and then the heat exchanger kicked on. This was just a loop of copper pumped with Freon, but it purred loudly enough to drown out any tire flipping, forklifts, or mortar attacks outside. Dazed, the interrogators played with crying baby tape over and over. Its muffled cooing, fussiness, even the screams at the end. The water froze and a stainless steel auger turned to break the ice into half moons. The ice slid down a chute and rumbled into the hopper. After several cycles, the hopper was full. The machine beeped softly and its red light blinked. I carried the hopper full of ice through the wool blanket that separated the sleeping area from the lab. The clock on the wall said 8. Starlight shone through the seams of my hut. The black box and the hard drive were on the workbench, where we'd left them before I'd gone to bed, around 5. The hard drive, I discovered, was blank. Scattered about were all the tools I'd used to test the black box gausser, degausser, car battery, jumper cables, acid bath, sledge. There was the jammer that I used to radiate the black box, hoping to elicit some response. All of these tests were negative. Now I carried the hopper outside, under the clear night sky. The tiniest sliver of the waxing room was visible. Gemini and Taurus and Canis Major all looped around Orion, whom the Milky Way cradled in one arm. I dumped the ice on the ground by my steps. R.H. hollered, "Hey!" I walked across the road to where R.H. stood behind the fence of the exercise yard. On the far side of the yard, detainees were lined up, hip to hip. They walked slowly backward while climbing the sand and combing it with their fingers. The boy was in the middle of the line. I watched him stand up to examine a rock that he'd discovered. He held it close to his face while turning it over. "What did you find?" R.H. asked. "Nothing," I said. "Nothing?" I didn't think it was worth explaining my theory that aliens had sent the black box to Earth as a listening device, and the boy had just happened to stumble upon it. "I'm going to have to bring him in," R.H. said. This meant that the boy would be interrogated, which I believe would yield no useful information, which would then land the boy in solitary while the crying baby tape played over and over. "Give me another day," I said. "A whole day?" R.H. said. "All right, noon tomorrow." A whistle sounded down the road. I turned to find Spot, looking my way while holding the door open to the briefing hut. Light poured out of the door, casting Spot's shadow across the road and over the sand dunes beyond. "You guys going out tonight?" R.H. said. "I guess so." "Where?" "Hit," I said, without knowing for sure. It just felt that way. O Positive kicked open the door to the facility and emerged with a bucket. He dumped black water with silver bubbles on the ground, releasing the smell of lavender. "Hey," R.H. called to him through the chain link. O.P. slid off a headphone and raised his eyebrows. "Hang up the no vacancy sign," R.H. said. "They're going back to hit." A cage bulb, the kind you'd hang off the hood of your car while doing a tune-up, lit the briefing hut. We sat under the light on rows of wooden benches. A white bed sheet, which functioned as our projector screen, hung at the front of the room. J.J. turned on the projector, squinted against the light. "We're going back to heat," he said, using the Iraqi pronunciation for hit. Then he talked us through the slideshow. The helicopters would drop us off at the train station around midnight. From there, we'd walk across the tracks and toward the Euphrates on a perpendicular road. We'd take a right this time. Our target was a 4-story building on a corner. Actions on target, or those steps taken to kill or capture our enemies within, were standard. We'd pull detainees as necessary and exfil southeast. Now JJ pointed his laser off the bedsheet, circling a spot on the plywood wall beyond. Out there we'd find an area with no tank traps, sinkholes, or barbed wire, where the helos could safely touch down. The last slide said simply, questions. There were none. JJ closed the brief, and white light projected onto the bedsheet. Spot stood up in that light, his lower lip packed with chew. He spit into the paper cup and said, "All right, how to put this?" Events of the last mission had convinced him that things were getting a little too loose. Not just with discipline, although dudes were lighting up every moth and bunny rabbit in the shadows, and not only with bullshit on the radio. Case in point, last night's reading of War and Peace. But with the actions on target. With our bread and fucking butter. And although he couldn't have to reiterate our philosophy, he felt the need, speed and violence. How many times had his ass and the asses of others been saved by those two elements working in concert? The answer was unknown and unknowable. We knew that. As the reigning world champions of speed and violence, we knew. So to go in doing one thing without the other, or neither, or to go in half-assed, Jesus. Dust motes followed Spot as he paced in the light above the projector beam. Nicotine entered his bloodstream through the thinnest of membranes on the side of his hip. His wayward eye was humming. These people, Spot would have us know, were trying to kill us. Examples, Habanyaya, examples, Ramadi, example, Al-Qim, goddamn Qim, in particular, with its remnants of the Republican Guard. Imagine how we'd not reacted like unconscious banshees there. Imagine if zero shits and zero fucks had not been given. Spot savored a fresh influx of nicotine, affording us time to imagine what we'd reflexively survived at Qim, which I tried. I really did. And that is the end of Hit. Yankee Two by Will Mackin. I want to thank you for joining us for Storytime for Grownups, and we hope you've enjoyed the story. And look for us again next month, where some brave soul will be here reading another story to you, far braver than me. Something entirely different. Now, do you have something you'd like to have read? Do you have a story or something you'd like to hear us read? If you do, please let the Ashland Library know. You can list it in the Facebook. You can call us up on the telephone. You can even send an email over here. We'd be happy to try to oblige. I want to thank you, and please enjoy the rest of your day.